stream all these live to YouTube so that the public component is maintained. And so I've started that. And the last thing I need to do is just read through our hearing script, which basically covers the procedure. And then we'll jump into the presentation of the applicant's case. So this is the August 18th, 2021 session of the zoning hearing examiner docket. My name is David Sturkey. I'm the zoning hearing examiner for the city of Cincinnati, and I'll preside over this hearing. The case before us today is case number ZH20210105. The purpose of this hearing is to allow applicants and opposing parties to testify and to offer and refute evidence and testimony. This hearing will follow the rules found in the zoning code and the supplemental rules of the zoning hearing examiner. All testimony and evidence that an applicant or any opposing party wishes to offer must be presented at this hearing unless the party has submitted evidence or testimony in the form of writing or digitally prior to this hearing. The hearing will proceed as follows. The applicant, the applicant's attorney, or the applicant's agent will first present the applicant's case. If there were anyone here from the public, they would have an opportunity to speak after the applicant had presented its case. And then if anyone did testify in opposition to this application, the applicant would have an opportunity to rebut that testimony. And then finally, the applicant will have an opportunity to make a closing statement. After all presentations have been made, I will close the hearing. Decisions may be expected within 2 weeks. I may limit or exclude testimony that I deem irrelevant or outside the scope of the application being considered. I may interrupt any speaker to ask questions or to make any comments. I may also refuse to consider hearsay testimony. The rules of evidence are extremely relaxed here, if not non-existent. Sometimes I will, depending on the type of testimony, allow that in. In the event of any technical difficulties or any unforeseen circumstances with the video conferencing technology, we'll do our best to troubleshoot those on the fly. To the extent we can't fix something or meaningfully continue with the hearing, I may continue or postpone this hearing at my discretion. Okay, last thing I need to do is swear in all of our witnesses. Mr. Cadden, is it Cadden?
It's Caden. Actually, I just got a
Caden.
message from my neighbor. He is trying to get into the meeting with the link provided, and he said he's having trouble with that. So if it's okay, and I don't know what you want to tell him.
Yes, I would encourage him to keep trying. If he'd like, I can resend the link. But he can join at any time and provide testimony.
Got it.
So I would encourage him to continue to try until we've finished here. And Mr. Caden, I'm assuming you're going to be in your individual capacity here today. So I will ask that everyone be sworn in. So if you intend on providing any testimony at all or asking any questions, do anything other than observing, then you have to be sworn in. So if everyone could raise their right hand, I need everyone to answer out loud. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Well,
okay. Is that a yes, Mr. Becker?
yes,
Did you say I will? Yeah.
I
okay.
will. I do.
That works. That all works. All right. Okay, so who's going to be taking the lead here on the presentation? Will it be Mr. Caden or Mr. Becker?
I'm happy to, Carl, if you,
Okay. No, that's good, John. You're the subject matter expert here.
I mean,
Sure.
it would be wise to introduce the owner of the property, obviously, the Cadens, Carl and Martha Caden. I said in my letter, in our application letter, they've been residents for many, many years in Hyde Park, Mount Lookout. Carl actually grew up in this house that is adjacent to the property at 2832 East St. Charles. Not sure when his father bought the property, but it's been a number of years. And the adjacent property that they've owned with the existing home has been a side yard for them for this many years. And it's suited, we thought, perfectly for an additional residence on that street. The oddity that we're faced with today, and I'll say just briefly, but the house itself, was a kind of a backtrack of how much do they want to live in. They had a large family, have a large family that grew up in the house on St. Charles. And now it's, of course, the empty nester syndrome with Carl and Muffy being the only residents. Not to insult them, but getting up in age, that they're starting to think about future needs. And that was the purpose of sort of looking at this lot originally. could we downsize? Could we make it more accessible in the future for us? So that's the impetus behind doing the project at all. So we've designed a home, and I started to say the oddity of this lot is that the geometric orientation is sort of clear, that it runs along with the houses going east to west along East St. Charles Place. Because of how it turns at 90 degrees right at that joint, there's a change in that orientation right there. This is ground zero of that change. The houses along St. Charles Place going north-south along from Erie, those lots are smaller for the most part, and they're oriented east-west, so a long direction going east-west. Because we're right at that joint, and the way this current lot touches the actual right-of-way, the city zoning has determined that this lot should adhere to the north-south lots on St. Charles. That causes us to have odd setbacks on the property. I don't know if you want to share any images, but you've seen through our application the images that we sent. It sort of shows the allowable building area according to MSP design based on the required setbacks. It creates a kind of long, skinny site to build on. Front yard facing to the east, rear yard facing to the west, which is not the way we designed the home, with everything facing south, which is what the current Caden residence does, faces the front facing south. So that's kind of why this happened, briefly. And we're, attempting to, in the end, get a variance for the rear yard. I'll put rear in quotes because it's really the determination of zoning that's the rear yard. So our front, meaning the south, and the rear, I mean the side yards facing south and north are quite large. They're 70 some feet, I think, in both, 70 and 40 something in both directions. We've adhered to the so-called front setback of 35 feet, or an averaging of all the lots adjacent. It's the rear yard now that becomes a question. So that's why we're attempting here to ask for this variance between the required setback of the city's requirement. I know it changes according to the adjacent lots again for averaging, but it's let me look at my drawing. What we have proposed is 19.57 as the average rear yard, again, quotes on the round rear, that rear yard be reduced to 19.57 feet. So that's why we're here. Again, if we were to reorient this the way we thought in the original design, those side yard setbacks, east and west side of the side yard setbacks are clearly more than is required. I think it's a total of 9 plus 6. So it's a total of 15 feet. Both side yards, in our mind, side goes more than 17 feet. And then the front yard is, I think, 45 feet back from what we would have called the front yard, 45 feet, when it was required that it be 35 feet. And then the rear yard's even larger, 74 feet, which again would require us to be less than that, quite a bit less, 35 feet, I believe. So I hope that's not too confusing, but that's kind of, it boils down to the requirement currently that this zoning is asking for, that the rear yard be reduced from, I'm looking now, it's 25 and a half is the required setback, and we're looking for 19 and a half, basically. So it's a 6-foot variance, basically.
The staff report mentions 30 feet as the required rear yard setback.
It does. I think the zoning code says 30. What we contended, actually, and they never addressed this directly, but there's an averaging that takes place. If you are to look at the lots to the south that run along St. Charles Place, like the very next adjacent lot, their setback is 25.6 feet. So as you go down, they only can verify that, because most of them are 25 to 30, somewhere in that range. So our averaging figured out to be 25.6 feet, not 30. So depending on how you interpret that, we would obviously prefer the averaging attempt.
Okay.
Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I do have some questions, but I found that if I tend to let everyone testify first, sometimes my questions get answered. So I may come back to you, but I appreciate your testimony. That was a good outline of the project, and I understand the orientation and all that. Real quick, let me check in with a neighbor here that just joined us. Is it Matiolitis?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So thanks for the moment to speak. I would like to state, I guess, two categories.
So,
where the neighbor.
John, give me 1 second. I will give you an opportunity to testify, and particularly if you have time constraints, I can let you go ahead of Mr. Caden.
That's fine with me, David.
Okay. Let's do that. But first, I need to swear you in.
Oh, sure.
And so, could you raise your right hand?
Yes.
I just need you to answer out loud. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay. And your address?
3575 St. Charles Place.
Okay.
We're the property just south, just adjacent to the Caden property.
Got it. What would you like to tell me here today?
I guess two aspects. One is property specific. The second is neighbor specific. So we are in the adjoining property. We purchased our property in the fall of 1987. And so we've moved in January of 88. So we've been neighbors to Mr. Caden's parents first, and then to Carl and his family. So we have a 33 plus year history of being Caden neighbors. We all have seen the way developments have gone, I would say in many respects in our Hyde Park neighborhood, in a excessive, crazy way. So the first question, our statement I'd like to make is I very much appreciate the spirit and the planning that the Cadens have taken with their developer in what they plan to do for this property. I mean, we are right next door. So it is big impact. Surrounding properties have trees. We are like just right there. They have shared in detail what they want to do. They've expressed great concern, not only to maintain the integrity of the property in I would call a respectful manner of not overdeveloping it. They are looking to basically put a single, I'd say modest home on a sizable property. Which is great. I think the planning is very much in tune with the street and the neighborhood. We've seen developments in Hyde Park that I would say are contrary, but what they have planned to do, I think, is very much in tune with what is already here. One of the questions I heard was the orientation. I think it makes sense that it's the new potential address is at East St. Charles address. And it makes sense that it is aligned with all the other homes. From our personal perspective, I would far rather look at the front of their house out of my side window than just the wall that is often typical of new construction. So I think that pretty much, if someone were to if I could plan what my neighbor is going to do, I don't think I could do a better job. So I think this would be a benefit to the street, the neighborhood, and the city. So that's sort of the property perspective and what is planned for the property. And again, we are the most impacted because From our north end of the lot, I think we have 5 feet to the property line. So they've been really gracious and inclusive. Now, the second thing has to do with people. You can't pick your neighbors usually. Well, 33 years, you get to know people. And I think it'd be a terrible, terrible loss for the community of St. Charles Place if, because the Cadens couldn't do what they're projecting, they would move. I mean, that's the bottom line. You know, Carl grew up on the street. He knows the people. Everyone knows him. Great neighbors. You know, it's and taking the two as a whole, I would say that this is a slam dunk, and that this is a great idea of what they're proposing.
Okay. Thank you very much, John, for your testimony and for your time here today. Okay, Mr. Caden, what would you like to tell me?
Wow, it's hard to follow that. Thank you, thanks, John. I appreciate it very much. And I would affirm everything that John Becker and John Machelite, well, immodestly John Machelite, but I think everything John Becker said about the project, I think that's what it is. And everything that John Machelite said about our intent, our, you know, the way what we'd like to do, kind of our ambition, and the way we've tried to structure this and to be transparent with all of our neighbors, that is also true. I mean, how they feel about it, I don't, you know, other than John, nobody's ever said they didn't, you know, that's a bad idea, we hate it, yada yada. John has been very open about, you know, hoping that what we do is going to be compatible and so on. And we took those aspirations and comments to heart. And I think you could ask John Becker if that's true, because John talked to us, you know, all throughout the development of the project. So that is our ambition. I think staff did a good job looking at all of this. I know John Becker worked closely has worked closely with the city staff and developing the project, and we've selected a builder who does work. You know, Andrew James does work in the area, and I think we looked at them. We wanted something that was compatible and that was quality, and we're satisfied.
And it is the big thing is we love the neighborhood, we love our neighbors, we love where we are, and we want to stay here. We don't want to leave. So this is our best shot at doing that. So unless I'm subject to your questions, I would just ask that you affirm the report of recommending the variance.
Okay, great. Thank you for that testimony. I did want to ask you one question about the code, which I generally ask at these variance hearings, but one of the conditions here is, or one of the standards for variances was a condition giving rise to the request for the variance created by the owner or any predecessor in title. So is your testimony here today that condition was not created to you, that it's the orientation of the lot that has resulted in the need for the variance, or some other argument?
I would ask John Becker to speak to that at first if he can. As I said, he's the subject matter expert.
Well, the way I understand it is, I think what you're saying, David, it's not the fault of the cadence that the geometric orientation of this larger property, and then subdivided well within density rules, allows for this other orientation. So I would say it's not the fault of the client that's the case. You know, it's more of a from above that the helicopter view requires this, or would suggest this anyway. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't suggesting that was the reason. I was just asking. I thought that's what I heard from your earlier testimony. So that suffices. Okay. we have our zoning plans examiner, Trey Sheldon, that has joined us here. I was going to give him an opportunity to provide any testimony.
Sure, I did not swear in, so I do. That's all right.
Thanks, Trey. Do you
Okay.
solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay.
One quick thing by way of disclosure, I have met Carl before. I'm an attorney as well outside of working as a zoning plan examiner, and I met Carl many years ago through my late father, Hank Sheldon, and I just want to disclose that, but we don't have any kind of business ties or anything, so I just wanted to be clear about that.
No, sure, I appreciate that, and if judges and hearing examiners couldn't hear cases from attorneys that they knew in Cincinnati, I don't think we'd have very many cases to hear.
Yeah,
so but
you
I
and I would both.
that.
Well, you weren't from here, but I grew up here. I'd have to move. I'd have to
Okay.
go somewhere else.
It's Cincinnati. Everybody somehow knows everybody or is connected to everybody else. I mean, somehow I'm sure we're all related. I don't know how, but I'm confident.
Sure. Thanks for that disclosure, though, Trey.
Yep.
It's noted for the record.
I did want
to
to confirm that I did find that the property was unique. I mean, I spelled it out in my staff report pretty carefully. That it's just a unique configuration. It's the largest lot anywhere along there. It's clearly oriented with the other dwellings that are all up on a north-south axis, if you will. And I think the neighbor here, Mr. Matuladis, did I pronounce it right? Okay, great. Anyhow, he is exactly what I would have found. And had somebody called and said they had issue with it, it would have shocked me, because it would be, far worse for him if he didn't know Mr. Caden and somebody were orienting a house the other way, faced the other direction. They could be looking at the side of a house, a big wall with only 2 windows in it and an air conditioning unit or something, I mean, whereas here they actually have a significant setback there from that part of the property, because actually what is technically the side yard is to the Cadens, their front yard, and it's much more substantial. So instead of just having to be 10 feet away from the neighbors, it's now significantly further back and an attractive facade of the house for anybody to look at. So, I think that the lot configuration was that way. And as I explained to Mr. Becker, there's no other way for zoning to view it except based on the frontage, as far as where you determine where the front of the lot is. When a place is on a corner, for example, when a house is on a corner lot, then you determine the frontage based on which is the narrower side of it, the narrower side of the lot. But that's not the case here. I had no choice but to find that to be the frontage to the east, because it's the only point where it fronts on any public right of way. So I think that was baked in whenever this lot was created, which probably was many years ago. So when the lot configuration is what it is. So I think that there's really nothing else they could have done about that, and therefore they also, as a result of that, inherently have what would be a strange configuration of putting, or a strange orientation of a house. If you did it facing the frontage, it would just look like an odd duck. I mean, there's no doubt. And also, I wanted to point out in my calculations and so on for the variances that both this lot and the lot immediately to the south, Mr. Matuladis's lot, both have irregular rear yards. So that has some impact on that as well. In fact, it did on the calculations for this variance, because Mr. Matuladis has a lot that where his rear yard depth is legally non-conforming. Basically, it pre-existed that way for dozens of years, or whenever his house was built. That's how long it's been that way. So you just got a couple unusual wrinkles in here, and I can't see how the house would have been built any other way but this. It's basically makes just common sense. So to touch on the the unreasonableness and the practicability or practical difficulties of this, it would have made you orient a house in a very strange manner. So,
yeah,
which would not have been typical of the neighborhood for sure. So,
okay. Thanks for that, Trey. Before you got here, there was some think slight disagreement on the averaging numbers. I think it was Mr. Becker's contention that this should be actually be a 25-foot requirement as opposed to 30 feet.
Well, the thing is, when you do that, and I don't think you realize this, but when we do that for zoning, we have to count an imaginary lot on either side. So like sometimes when there's not a lot there and you're doing you're doing averaging along there, side to side, the way the code reads, you have to average on both sides. So you've seen that before, David, where we have like an imaginary lot where we just use the base zoning because it requires you to average both directions. And so here the lot next to it, Mr. Matulaitis' lot is immediately to it. The other lot on the other side is not even the same rear yard or anything. It would be the side yard of a house facing to the north. So it's not apples to apples. It would be like not being in the same block face or not the same zoning district. And we always have to compare apples to apples. So the way I did that was to average the Matulaitis' rear yard with the required rear yard for the base zoning, coming up with like 30 or something. So you do like 35 and then the 25 or whatever it was for Mr. Matulaitis. And then you come up with the average of those two. So
okay.
That's how. Now, if there was another irregular lot to the north on this, for example, for whatever reason, there was another irregular lot further to the north, I would have used the actual measurement of the rear of the house. Does that make sense?
It does.
But I use the base zoning instead. We always have to do that when we have an averaging requirement.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Trey. Thanks for that testimony. Mr. Becker or Mr. Caden, anything else in closing or otherwise before we adjourn here today? I don't think I have any more questions.
No, I just have one thing. First of all, a couple things. First, this is why Mr. Sheldon does what he does, and I do what I do. I understood very little of that technically, but I agree. Whatever it was, that sounded good, so I agree with it. But since we're of the record, to the earlier question about the depth of that, the setback or the variance thing. Look, I understand that none of the neighbors on the west side, a couple of the neighbors, none of them have objected, which I'm grateful for. I'm glad. But notwithstanding that, even before we got there, maybe this is because maybe they didn't object because we in looking at that, and I believe we sent pictures, I think, to Cassandra early on, or Ms. Mays early on, and showing sort of the photographs of the lot of kind of standing in the side yard, what is now the side yard, what is the house lot. And we have planned for, and there is now a sort of a green screen between that what will be the new backyard, so to speak, and those west side lots. And so being mindful of that, we do care about everybody's space, and we want to maintain that. So that's there. And also because we are, I think we are, I'm pretty confident that the house will be have a very low carbon footprint, will achieve platinum LEED status without too much difficulty, if any. That the yard, the way the yard is in general, all the greenery and the natural habitat and the garden that we have, all that's relevant. And so we want to maintain that kind of feel about Hyde Park. So anyway, my point is to Mr. Matulaitis' point, and I think which corroborates what the hearing Mr. Sheldon said, we're trying to maintain all the features that I believe the code emphasized. So the spirit behind all, there's a reason for all these rules and regulations, and I hope you agree that we've done everything we could to honor all of those and to put this house in a position that, like all these other houses, will be here and be a good part of the neighborhood for the next 100 years. So that's all I'll have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Becker. Anything else in closing or otherwise? You're still muted, Mr. Becker.
Now unmute. Not much. I'll just thank Trey for his description. Sadly, I do understand what he was talking about. the help that they've given us through this process, which has been, a little fraught with hair pulling because of the ruling, but understood, clearly as they explained it to us. I will say the last bit, as Carl mentioned about, kind of environmentally trying to be a good neighbor. Even the lot topography dictates to me as an architect, what should be built in certain cases. So the orientation of a lot, where the sun is, and also the topography of the lot. I know that's not in the bailiwick of this committee, but if you were to orient the house the other way, you'd have an oddly shaped facade that would actually slope up the hill. In this case, we're placing the house at the top of that hill, which is where it should be and where all the other houses along East St. Charles do their thing. So I think that's also just a side note to how we're orienting this.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Becker. I think we'll leave it at that then. I've reviewed everything beforehand, and after hearing the testimony today, I'm going to approve the application. What typically takes the most time for me, frankly, on some of these is just actually typing up my official findings. I've got a little bit of a queue right now that I need to work through, but typically I can have those out within 2 weeks. Knowing that this will be approved, you can start the application process for the building permits if you haven't already, which should save you some time on the back end. As soon as I finish the decisions, I put them into a PDF. I email them to everyone that's in the hearing, so that everyone has a copy, and you'll have that just moments after the decision is complete. Once you have that, then you should be all clear to work on any additional permitting with Trey. But like I said, and Trey can talk to you more about the actual process, but like I said, you should be able to start to apply for those building permits to cut down on any additional time that it takes to issue those. So any other questions right now about any of this?
No, thank you, David and Trey. Thank you very much for the time. I mean, I'm glad I'm saying this, with the approval, but irrespective of that, as a person who used to be in the Pink Lady on Plum Street, I know that your jobs sometimes are challenging, and you deal with a lot of emotion and a lot of upset and a lot of, you got to reconcile a lot of things. And so that, again, that was part of the drive for us, was to, deal with that, because that's what the price you pay for living in a city, and especially a city like ours. So I very much appreciate the housing stock that we have here and the care that's taken to, preserve the character of neighborhoods all across the city and to advance the interests of the neighborhoods. And so I would just, since we're on the record, I want to thank you both. Thanks to Mr. Sheldon, and thanks to you, Mr. Sturkey, for doing what you do. That's all I got.
Thanks, Mr. Caden. Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Thank you very much.
Likewise for me.
So, okay, well, if any other questions come up in the meantime, feel free to reach out to myself or to Trey, and we'll be happy to answer anything. Or if you'd like a status update on the decision, just send me an email and I'll let you guys know where I'm at. Unless there are any other questions now, I think we are adjourned. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. We're adjourned.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
You do the